Bonjour mesdames et messieurs, je suis Vanessa et je suis ici la directrice générale de communication.
Is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Our virtual event today are from various parts of the country and potentially the world. Therefore, you may work on a different Indigenous territory. I encourage you to take a moment to think about the territory that you occupy. I'm now pleased to introduce today's event entitled Engaging with Canadians Through Social Media. On behalf of the school, I'd like to offer you all a very warm welcome to all of our participants as well as our panelists. Before we get started, we just have a few housekeeping items that I'll walk you through. So please note that because of bandwidth, our panelists may lose connection. If that's the case, don't worry, we're going to be working behind the scenes to get them back. So just ask that you guys stay with us. And thank you all for your patience in getting today's event started. We experienced a couple of technical issues at the beginning, but we are all good to go now. During the event, you're going to be able to submit your questions for our panelists at any time by pressing the icon on your screen that looks like a little person with a raised hand. And I'll cue you again to remind you during the question period that you can access that question feature. And in order to have the best viewing experience, we recommend that you disconnect from your VPN if you can by using a personal device or just accessing a non-Government of Canada Wi-Fi network. Also a reminder that we have simultaneous interpretation services available for today's event, which will be primarily in English with French simultaneous interpretation. And we also have access to real-time transcription services. The instructions for how to access these are with you in the reminder emails that were sent by the school. So without further ado, we'll get started with today's event. We're going to do a quick round of introductions with all our panelists before they dive into their more formal presentations, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. So I'm going to go around the table, the virtual table, and ask each of our panelists to give a quick intro of themselves, and we'll start with Véronique. Hi, Véronique, over to you. And
Hi, thank you so much. I just want to start off by saying a big thank you to the CCO and the Canada School of Public Service for hosting this. Very excited to be part of it and really excited to learn more about my fellow panelists. So my name is Véronique. I am the manager of media services at Parks Canada. So my team is actually split in 3 teams. So we have media monitoring, media relations, and of course, social media. So I'll talk a bit more about what my team does in my presentation. But just quickly, for those who are not familiar with Parks Canada, we actually manage 47 national parks, 171 national historic sites, 5 marine conservation area, and 1 national urban park. So very diverse mandate. We're not just talking about national parks. We can talk about science and conservation, underwater archaeology, very, very diverse. And I think that's what I like my job so much is every day is very different. Apart from being with Parks for 6 years, I've actually worked in social media for over 10 years now, maybe even close to 15 years. But now I'm aging myself, so I'll just stick with 10 years. That sounds better. But I'm very, very fascinated by social media. I'm just intrigued by the evolving tool that is social media. It's you always have to evolve and adapt yourself, reinvent your strategies, and adapt to the changes to the new algorithms or the new platforms that come out. So I think that's why I've been in social media for so long. It's just very fascinating to see the actual impact and the power that social media has. So if you're using social media strategically and using the right tactics, you can actually influence human behavior. So that's pretty strong. That's very powerful. So you'll notice I'm very passionate about social media, so I'm very happy to be here today and to actually talk about the different tactics and strategies that we use at Parks Canada. And of course, I'll talk more about that later on. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Véronique. Yeah, you have a real dream job over at Parks Canada, I think. And it's crazy to think that there was a time before social media where we didn't have this powerful tool in our arsenal. Okay, well, over to you, Alex.
Hi, everybody. Just also would like to thank the CCO and the school for putting this on, and to everyone who's joined in online to watch. Yeah, I'm the acting manager of COVID-19 social media operations at Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada. So I'll be talking a little bit today just about our experiences in engaging with people through social media in the context of a global pandemic, which has been a real learning experience, very interesting, a lot of challenges, but a lot of silver lining too. Other than my current role, I've been working in social media in a GOC context for about 6 years, at Health Canada for 3 of those. And before that at Transport Canada, and I know Veronique came from Transport too, and also Western Economic Diversification, and spent a little bit of time on the Hill working for the Senate administration before that. So very much looking forward to my colleagues' presentations as well, and I think we're going to have a really interesting, diverse discussion. Social media, I think we can all agree, has become one of the primary ways that we connect with Canadians and inform them about Government of Canada activities and important public health measures and things like that in our case. So I think it's always evolving, and it's a great opportunity to have a discussion about how some very important departments and very important channels are working to be innovative and to push the boundaries.
Thanks so much, Alex. Thanks for being here. And last but certainly not least, we have Captain Kirk Sullivan. Over to you.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm Captain Kirk Sullivan. I'm the Assistant Public Affairs Attaché here in Washington, D.C. I'm the assistant to Lieutenant Colonel Paul Lucette, and together we support our Canadian Defense Attaché and in turn the ambassador to the United States in conducting military diplomacy throughout the United States. That is, we are focused on engaging primarily with Americans, not Canadians. I don't know what the exchange rate is exactly today, but I'm hoping that some of the things regarding our approach can be applicable to engaging audiences anywhere. I think they are. I'm certainly grateful for the opportunity to speak here to the organizers, and I'm very much looking forward to the presentations from Alex and Veronique. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, that is the who's who. So we're going to dive right into the presentations because we lost a little bit of time at the beginning. So we're going to go back to you, Veronique, and Parks Canada, and let's learn all about how you run the social media shop over at Parks. Go for it.
Perfect. Thank you. So of course I had to start off and showing off a picture of me and the mountain parks, but I did talk about the power of social media and how it can influence behavior. And me and my husband traveled to the mountain parks because I've seen so many amazing pictures on social media and it really inspired me to go and visit. So I wanted to talk a bit more about my dream team. So as I mentioned, in my team, I do have the social media team. So we're very, very small. So it's a quick little picture. So a big shout out to the ladies. I hope they're watching. Kim, who's on mat leave. Victoria is replacing her. Nora and Hannah, my amazing creative little superstars. And we also have a part-time student that had started this summer. And so hi, Bridget. Hope you're watching. So at Parks Canada, we actually have over 200 social media accounts. We don't manage 200 social media accounts. Our national team is in charge of the national accounts that are called Parks Canada. So we have Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook with over 1 million followers. So our small team is in charge of drafting all the content, doing all the monitoring, engaging. On top of taking care of the national accounts, we do provide support to our regional offices. So those 200 accounts out there, those regional offices do sometimes need support and guidance and advice, so they come to us. So we do provide that service. And yeah, that's the team in a nutshell. So maybe we can go to the next slide. So I thought I'd talk today about, well, first of all, I wanted to start you off with a quote, not a quote, a fact. So did you know that 16% of adult Canadians are getting their information about Parks Canada from social media? So that's 5.3 million people. So again, when I talked about the impact and the power of social media, you're looking every time that we tweet out, we have the potential to reach, that amount of people who are looking to get their information from social media. So that's pretty huge. So we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to talk about objectives. So the reason why Parks Canada is on social media, the goal for the agency is to increase brand awareness, build relationships and a sense of community, and build trust. So if you're looking at these three really high-arching objectives, the common denominator, the common KPI is engagement. As you know, like I mentioned again earlier, the ever-evolving social media, if I was giving this presentation 3 years ago, I don't think I would be talking that much about engagement. I think I would probably be talking about reach and, the coveted likes. But now that the algorithms have changed, you really need to spark those conversation and the engagement to be seen on social media. So looking at our objective, if I want to increase brand awareness, I want people to actually share and, engage with us so it can show on their feed. So increase brand awareness, engagement, build relationship. We want to have conversation. We want people to come to us and have those real conversation and use an authentic tone. So how do we measure that? Engagement. And build trust. We want to be seen as a trusted source of information. So we want people to come to our channels to ask the question and know that they're going to get answers. And how do you measure that? Engagement. So again, engagement. That's really what we prioritize to meet all our objectives. So I put a little quote here: as long as your audience is engaged, no matter how small the audience, it will grow organically. And again, like I said, if I were giving this presentation 3 years ago, I remember how with one Facebook post, we could get 1,000 likes easily. It was really, really easy. But, was that content really meeting or resonating with our followers? Because they weren't taking the time to actually comment. So I think when someone actually goes through everything on social media and stops and actually takes the time to comment or to ask a question, that's where the social media gold is. So I feel engagement is really, really powerful. So I gave a final example. I just find that one really funny. So we had a post on a camping accommodation, and so Emily, and for those watching in French, the example is a bit different, but I think you'll get the gist of it. So Emily tagged her friend Jim and Laura, and she said, for next time that we go glamping with Diva Jim, and then Jim replies, hey, I appreciate comfort, ha ha ha. So we took 5 seconds to reply and say, who doesn't, Jim? Embrace the comfort. And then Laura, oh my God, Jim, Parks Canada replied to you, #famous by association. So that small 5-second, cheeky response actually really resonated. And what we've noticed the next day, our posts, Emily, Jim, and Laura liked it. Jim shared it. Emily was commenting on it. So those people that we took the time to engage with actually became ambassadors of our brand without even knowing. So with them actually starting to engage more on our platform, they were contributing to our reach and to actually, increasing the brand awareness and building that relationship. So again, I think engagement goes a really long way. So we can go on to the next slide. So I'd like to talk about tactics that we use. Excuse me. So global pandemic. Parks Canada actually had to close its places for the first time in history. It was, we are used to be very loved. We get a lot of love on social media. We get a lot of people visiting our places and are excited about planning their trips, and they're sharing their photos and their experiences. And we got a lot of people angry A lot of people that were stuck at home and wanted to go outside and were like, sorry, we're closed. So how to deal with that, how to promote our places when our places are closed, how to actually, stay relevant and stay top of mind and actually show up in people's feed, and how to do engagement when we're not out there, we're not in the field doing the great conservation work that we do. So I'm going to talk about 3 tactics and 3 strategies that we use, that we've been using for a while, but especially with the pandemic, we thought it was really important to prioritize. So the first one is use timely hooks. There's so much noise on social media, so much content. Like, you can pick up your phone, put it back, get a coffee, come back, and it's going to be different content. There's so much noise. So how do you break through that noise? I think for myself personally, when I'm looking at what's going on, of course a photo will get my attention, but I want to know, why am I seeing this today? Why am I seeing this on my feeds today? Why should I take the time to stop, read, and perhaps engage with you? So I think it's really important to put content out that's in the now, that's really, really timely. So one thing we've been doing to plan our content is to actually look at theme days. You'll be surprised of International Day of what's every single day there's a day of something. So we look at those days and we kind of see, okay, what can we use to actually match up with things that we want to promote or we want to talk about. So you'll notice this example, it was National Sleepover Day. I guess that's a thing. So we said this National Sleepover Day, then again, pandemic, we're closed. Why don't you grab a sleeping bag and camp right in your living room? And then, okay, engagement. How can we get people engagement? Show us how creative you can be with your sleepover. So we hit the mark in terms of, okay, so if I'm scrolling, someone will be like, I didn't know today was National Sleepover Day. And then we'll read this and be like, well, it's a pandemic, I'm bored. Maybe I can get my kids to do a sleepover in the living room. I can take pictures and, of course, share it on social media. So I think we really hit the mark with that message. We got some really great engagement. A lot of people were answering, and we took that opportunity to actually engage and respond to people and say, well, we miss you too. Like, we're looking forward to, this to be over and to reopening and, getting those conversations, those authentic conversations going. I'll just use one other quick example, because I think a lot of people out there will be like, well, National Sleepover Day, that doesn't really resonate with my content. It doesn't have to be really, really close to what you're doing. You can use a random National Relaxation Day to put in your content. The other example I'm going to give is we had a regional office from Yukon contact us saying, our Facebook is not getting that much traction. Can you maybe help us out and get more followers? So I'm like, sure. Do you mind sending me like a great picture, and we'll figure out when we can actually, slot it in. So we're looking at the different theme days, and we decided it was World Dictionary Day. So you'll think, okay, Vero, where are you going with this? So we said, Happy World Dictionary Day. We challenge you to use one word to describe this photo. And of course, it was an amazing photo. And we said, please, give some love to our colleagues up in Yukon and follow their account. So we posted that. It was like at the end of the day, we leave. The next morning, I get a phone call from my Yukon colleagues. They're like, oh my God, we're blowing up. There's so many people following us. And we actually had 800 comments. So people were just trying to one-up each other with their words, and we had to Google so many words. But I just want to give that example, because National Dictionary Day has nothing to do with Parks Canada, nothing. But we took that hook to actually get someone to be like, I'm intrigued. Oh, challenge, I wanted a challenge. Okay, great. And then, get something that's timely and that will actually meet our objective of giving visibility to our colleagues up in Yukon. Again, theme days are great, but if you don't have any theme days, consider weekly hashtags or daily hashtags that are usually trending. So every Monday, you'll see Motivation Monday is trending. So why not try to incorporate those in your messages? So we can move on to the next slide, please. The next slide is the next tip is to follow the trends. There's so many trends out there. I think it's really important to keep an eye on what's trending. So every morning we get in, obviously we'll read our clippings so we kind of know what's in the news, what people are talking about, if there's any hot topics, but we'll also check social media and make sure we know what's trending. I'm all about like jump on that bandwagon. If there's something that everybody's talking about, that means there's a hashtag that people are clicking on, and probably an audience that you're not reaching whatsoever. So there was this fun trend at the end of the summer, the Reese Witherspoon challenge, where it had different months, and as the months go by with this pandemic, people were freaking out, so they were using, cute little photos, and then it ended up with disheveled, people, and so we had a little fun. We did it with animals. We actually, funny enough, had some people think it's about a horoscope. Anyways, either way, it met our objective to get conversation, so get engagement. We had people sharing it. Oh my God, good job, Parks Canada, well done. And we actually reached an audience that we wouldn't, because that hashtag has nothing to do with us, but it gave us visibility because it was trending. The example on the right is the bingo card. So again, we're in the pandemic. This was in April. We had just announced that we were not opening our places. We were getting a lot of hate. So we're like, oh, how can we engage with people that are not loving us right now? How can we get them to engage? Okay, so maybe we can get them to reminisce and kind of remember the good times. So we did a bingo card. So, we asked people to participate, see if they could do lines. So, they had camp at a national park. I've met Parka, our mascot. So we had a lot of engagement. So we had 123 comments and 55 shares. So that's pretty great, for a post at a time where we're close and people hate us. So again, just jump on those trends, try to make it work for your own content. And yeah, don't be afraid to be creative. So we can move on to the next slide. So my last tip of the day is user-generated content. So our Instagram is actually 95% user-generated content. When we launched our Instagram account, we celebrated our 4-year anniversary last week. So we actually, before launching our Instagram, we asked people, what do you want to see? And we were surprised how many people said, we don't want your pictures, Parks Canada, we want people's authentic photography. So we want pictures that are in the now. So obviously, if you're visiting, you want to see recent pictures. You don't want to see pictures that were taken in 2017 that were photoshopped, and they're all great and done by a professional photographer. So most of our photos on Instagram are from people out there that are tagging us. But we're also doing some fun campaigns. So I put a 2007 campaign just because it was one of our biggest ones. We wanted people to order their free passes for Canada 150. And we said, okay, so how can we get the word out that, we have a free pass? There's so many posts and so many things you can say, get your free pass. So we actually started the campaign, Show Us Your Pass. So when people received it, they actually took a picture, took a selfie, posted on social media. And we actually could just sit back and people were doing the promotion for us, right? They were getting the message out without us having to always talk about it. And it had such a great success. My next slide, I'll just talk really quickly. I'm conscious of time. I'm going to talk quickly about a user-generated campaign that we've done just recently, again, during a pandemic. How can we talk about our places without actually promoting visitation? So that was a hard one. So we started the campaign hashtag Parks Memories, and just asking people to share their memories. So without us always posting great photos of our places, we actually had people do not the dirty work. That's not what I wanted to say, but to be the ambassadors for us. So to post the content for us. without us having to always post and people get angry because, we are closed. So Parks Memories did really well. And you can see the first example really hits all the mark of what I've discussed. It was Environment Week, so very timely. We use the hashtag stay home because obviously that was very, very popular. So we're getting a lot of reach with that. And we're asking people to share their memories, so using user-generated content. So that posted amazingly well, and people were sharing their photos and doing promotion for us. So yeah, I think I hit everything. Last slide, just a big thank you for listening to me ramble about our great, amazing social media accounts and my amazing team that I admire, appreciate, love you guys. And thank you. Don't forget to follow Parks Canada.
Thank you so much, Vero. That was fantastic. So I'm really, really hearing that message of, be relevant and timely, be authentic, and be engaging. And I think it's fantastic to see the creativity that your team has shown, within a strategic frame, but also aligned with what the government needs to be putting out in terms of messaging around, staying home and all of that. So it's a really great way you guys have knitted all that together. So next on our list, we're going to switch gears over to the health portfolio, and we've got Alex Newman with his presentation.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for that, Vero. That was great. Just first, I'd like to give a big shout out to my team in the COVID Ops social media wing of the larger social media team at Health Canada. So big ups to Eric, Mike, Lena, and Matt, and also to the rest of the team. So we're sort of a bit of a smaller team within the broader social media team, and we deal exclusively with COVID-19 related content and also with proactive engagement around that. So going out and, as Vero mentioned, liking people's posts, commenting, pushing forth the broader conversation within our community on social media. I'm going to talk a little bit about our experiences in the context of a global pandemic and trying to not only get social media engagement, which is kind of built in given the circumstances, but also trying to encourage positive discourse and that sort of stuff. So if I could have the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, sometimes the circumstance sort of delivers you an audience, and this isn't exactly a positive circumstance, but as you can see from the graph, in around about March, we saw our content jump from being around 100K engagements in a month in December to nearly 6 million a month in March and April. So pretty significant. So we have this big surge in followers as well. A quick shout out to the folks who run the CPHO Twitter account as well. They saw more new followers this year than Drake, Justin Bieber, or Shawn Mendes. So to give you an idea of the amount of eyes we have on our content, that's pretty significant. If I could have the next slide, please. So with that built-in audience, it's a matter of what we do with it. So how do we make sure that Canadians are getting the facts? Obviously, we have a responsibility to be informing people about important public health measures, government programs, et cetera, in a sort of context that is very full of misinformation, negative sentiment, trolls, and the like. How do we encourage a positive discourse? How do we get people talking in a positive way about how they're following public health measures to help their community, and et cetera? And perhaps most importantly, how is our content actually influencing people's behavior and encouraging healthy behaviors within the community? Next slide, please. So in the context of a pandemic, the 3 C's are something you want to avoid. So that's closed spaces, crowded places, and closed faces. But in the context of comms, I think there are 3 C's that we want to encourage. So that's collaboration, creativity, and consolidation of efforts. So I've found, in addition to creating good content, which is the first stepping stone, how do you do that and how do you get there? I found the most successful content that we've had has resulted from really close collaboration, not just within the social media team, but across the comm shop at Health Canada, in fact. So when you get a whole bunch of people with sort of diverse backgrounds, ideas, different priorities in some cases, working on different files around the table to brainstorm, to think about how the different contributions can contribute to the broader picture of a campaign. That's really when we've had our most success. So one example of that I'd give is the COVID Alert app campaign, where we've worked incredibly closely with marketing, with strategic communications, web, across all of the shops, and in a really collaborative atmosphere. So we're really lucky at Health to have that kind of structure with among our teams. But coming together, we were able to sort of find innovative ways that we could have our organic social media complement marketing efforts and sort of inform tactics for strategic communications and work together to develop them. So we did some innovative stuff in terms of having a branded hashtag emoji, which was great, working closely with Twitter to do that. And really just kind of encouraging that positive engagement through proactive sort of outreach and working with influencers, that kind of stuff. Next slide, please. So being proactive, as I was talking about, and I think Varro really kind of outlined this really well, the importance of it in the context of today's social media, is finding ways to connect directly with Canadians. And I mean, it's important to do that in terms of interacting with other accounts that have big followings and high engagement rates. So for example, on that side of things, the other day, we had William Shatner like a reply that we posted on Twitter, not to his account or to his content, but to one of his followers' posts. So we had replied saying, you know, thanks for spreading the word about the COVID-19 app. And he liked our reply to someone else's tweet, which was great. And just last night, we had a similar engagement with Kevin McDonald from the Kids in the Hall. But it's also really important to be talking to individuals, just regular Canadians, right? So every time you like someone's post, especially on Twitter, the way the algorithms work, that's going to show up in people's feeds. So you see an increase if you're a follower of Health Canada. In fact, on Twitter, for example, you'll see posts occasionally come up saying Health Canada like this, Health Canada replied to that. And that's a way of kind of encouraging that positive discourse because we also see increases when we do actions like that of those individuals kind of stepping up and engaging again with our content continually, right? So if someone says, hey, I downloaded COVID Alert, for example, and it's great, or I got an alert and thank goodness everything's okay, but I'm so glad I used the app. If we engage with them on that, thank them for sharing their story and like their comment, they're more likely to engage with other people in their own community. They're more likely to say, to reply to a friend who's maybe not so sure about the app saying, hey, actually the app is great. If I could have the next slide, please. So again, being part of the conversation, following the trends is extremely important too. And trying to find ways to inject a little bit of levity, which isn't an easy task in the context of a pandemic where there's really serious and stressful time for people. But at the same time, we want to try to be a positive voice and be something that's a little bit of a bright light while people are doom scrolling at night in bed. Maybe they see a funny tweet from us and that brightens up their day a little bit, with the added benefit of informing them about some of the important public health measures. So this example is from back in May, Star Wars Day. So as you can see, we got a whole lot of engagement in terms of retweets, likes, and replies, and all positive, right? So finding ways to be creative to try to attach, in our case, those important public health measures into messages that are going to reach a broader audience, get inside broader conversations, and hopefully inject a little levity into what can be a very serious circumstance. Next slide, please. So putting the content to work, once you've developed it, it's important to kind of engage with people, answer their questions. I know across the GOC, we all have pretty robust mechanisms within our social media teams to be answering questions that are coming in from folks. And obviously, we've seen a big surge in that over the past few months. But I think it's also important in that context to use that as a precursor to developing content. So when you're thinking about content and when you're reviewing social media plans, thinking about what questions individual Canadians might have about the content that you're putting out. and sort of building that in to the content structure as you're creating it. I'm not a big fan personally of the term risk averse because I think it sort of suggests risk avoidance. So I'd rather be risk aware. I think in the context of social media where things are moving so quickly and opportunities for engagement can be quite fleeting, it's important to sort of course, consider the risks, to be deliberate, to be aware, but it's also important to take them. I found that a lot of the time, it's unavoidable that mistakes will inevitably happen, but in my experience, even the worst mistakes aren't that bad. It's just a tweet. It can be deleted if it needs to, if it's that bad, or you can put a reply clarifying things. But most of the time, it doesn't really result in any sort of lasting damage to your brand. So important to keep that in mind when you're considering tactics and when you're considering sort of engagement that might push the boundaries a bit. And in terms of performance engagement too, I think we've all probably had experience in managing social media in terms of getting requests that are just kind of the numbers, right? So we had this many impressions, we had these many engagements. But I think it's important to do more deep dives and to give the time to do that. So thinking about how the numbers relate to your tactics, how they relate to the objectives that you had, and how they might be influencing sort of real world action. So social media metrics, I mean, in the end, they end up being kind of anecdotal or very hard to correlate with sort of real actions. But there's ways that you can use analysis to correlate what's going on in the context of the broader conversations in social media. Were there announcements happening about government programs that day? Could that have had an impact on this? So I think it's important to do deep dives and to really kind of take the time to think in detail about what is influencing your social media engagement and how that can inform your tactics of what's working and not. Next slide, please. So in the context of COVID, a big challenge for us over the past few months has been dealing with misinformation and disinformation. And for anyone who's not sure about the difference between the two, disinformation is sort of something that's not deliberate. It's when users are kind of sharing content that they think is legitimate and it's probably not, and misinformation is a bit more of a deliberate act from a bad actor. So it can be a little counterintuitive. We hear the word sort of detect and correct thrown around a lot when it comes to dealing with misinformation in the GOC context. And I think that is the correct way to look at it, but it all depends on how you're correcting, because there's a real risk when you're going and engaging with trolls, for example, that you're just going to give them a larger platform for them to spread misinformation. So if we reply to someone who's deliberately putting out misinformation on social media, we're actually providing them a broader audience and more eyes to see that. So generally, that's a tactic we avoid. And the other thing to think about is it's a problem to which there isn't really a solution. It's something that needs sustained effort. So you need to be aware of the context of what the conversations are happening across social media, so keeping your ear to the ground. You need to be very lean in trying to identify the falsehoods that are out there as they're coming up. And that can be through social media monitoring, through media monitoring of news stories, that sort of stuff. And also be topical, right? So fight back with facts, not necessarily by replying directly to someone who's putting out misinformation, but by tailoring your content in that time frame in order to address it, right? So if we hear conversations around misinformation around, I'll use COVID alert as an example again, around COVID alert tracking your location or something like that. We know that we need to go out with content that's tailored to that and engage with folks in a positive way to sort of push that message out that day. So again, opting out of arguments, don't engage with the trolls. It's just doing them a favor for the most part. And rewarding positive behavior. So again, that means going and liking people who are putting out correct information, who are correcting folks in their own networks about some of the public health measures, about which other people might be putting out misinformation, and take a breath, because it's an uphill battle. Every day, there's new pieces of misinformation coming out, and All you can do is try to keep up with it and try to create positive conversations and address those issues as they come up. So that's it for my presentation for now, and looking forward to a broader discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Alex. Yeah, I think you and Veronique both touched on the theme of trust and how important that is in terms of the government's official accounts and messaging back to Canadians on a lot of these issues. Hugely important in the context of the pandemic right now. So thanks very much for those tips and tricks, Alex. So now we have Captain Kirk Sullivan with this presentation. Over to you, Kirk.
Thank you, Vanessa. I think my slides are coming up there. And thank you to Veronique and Alex. I'm taking a lot of notes down here, very beneficial stuff. Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we conduct military diplomacy in the United States. But what is a military diplomat? What does military diplomacy look like? Well, typically it looks like emails, teleconferences, briefings, casual gatherings, and handshakes before coronavirus, that is. But most of it on the surface doesn't appear very interesting. So rather than continuously showing Canadians talking to Americans, this Twitter account talks to Americans. In other words, it conducts military diplomacy by telling people about military diplomacy. It serves itself as a military diplomat. But what does a military diplomat do? What does a military diplomatic Twitter account tweet about? So there's the what we are and what we do, but all of that is covered in unique and creative ways by our colleagues back in Canada. We amplify these posts when appropriate or applicable to us, but it's not our focus. So what is our focus? At a basic level, we're focused on relationships, alliances, and the threats we face every day. Empathy, humanity, compassion, they all underpin any good relationship. And they're critical aspects of any military activity, but they're particularly important when building relationships. So we're always trying to figure out who our neighbors are and who we are. It's a continuous exploration of each other. Because if our mission is to maintain and build relationships, we need to talk about the issues that matter to our partners. And we need to tell them about the issues that matter to us. We need to understand them and we need to help them understand us. We explain to each other who we were, who we are, and who we want to be in the future. Ultimately, we just need to be good neighbors, which seems fairly simple. Maybe simple for most people. Maybe it comes a little bit difficult to others, like the person featured in this picture, me. Here's what it looks like in my office when I'm trying to figure out the Americans. It's also what it looks like in my office when I'm trying to figure out Canadians, quite frankly. Stark, poorly decorated, uneven monitors, boring. And here's me trying to be CAF in US, the Twitter account. And it turns out when you add cats, you're more interesting. The numbers shown here are good, but they're still quite modest when you consider the significant followings of other accounts, like those run by Alex and Veronique. And we obviously don't judge everything that we do here strictly by numbers either. We're talking about relationships. And obviously, it's not as simple as adding a few felines. For the most part, we leave the talking about operations to those responsible for them. But sometimes we translate their work into messaging likely to be seen and understood by as many Americans as possible. Obviously, emojis help on social media. So too does playing on preconceived notions of Canada as a winter hinterland. I'll note this particular mission in Rogers Pass in British Columbia is conducted in conjunction with Parks Canada, as Veronique knows. As we engage with Americans, and this speaks to having your ear to the ground on social media, opportunities arise to demonstrate our values. Who were we, who are we, and who do we want to be again? So we're proud of ourselves and each other. But we also must acknowledge, as subsequent tweets to this one in a thread did, that we didn't always treat everyone equally in Canada. We must talk about those in our past who had to fight for their country. And we must remember all they faced, all they overcame, because their stories are our stories too. Their past is part of our present. Indeed, they are us. And while we embrace some of the preconceived notions here in the United States about Canada, polite, apologetic, we must also acknowledge the difficult parts of our past. These difficult parts still reverberate through our systems today. Many of us who used to wear or who still wear the uniform were affected by residential schools. Here in the United States, we represent everyone from our past and present, and certainly not just those who look like me or those who had a privileged upbringing like I did. So certainly on a day-to-day basis, I try to learn more about those upbringings and those people, those Canadians, and I'm grateful for the opportunity every day to learn more about my own country and trying to translate it for Americans. And hopefully, if we're doing it right, if we're doing the neighbor thing right, the military diplomat thing, we talk as much or more about our partners as we do ourselves. Because good neighbors celebrate your success. They stand by your side in challenging moments. And you'll note on this slide, I've removed the stats from the bottom of the screenshot because metrics are largely irrelevant when it comes to tweets like this one. All that matters is that it matters to our neighbors, their families, their friends. Sorry, I'm getting emotional talking about it. Because their pain is our pain, their grief is our grief. And unfortunately, this year we've had so very much grief. It's just really important to be there with them through that. And we know that many people who serve in the military face significant PTSD issues and a wide array of challenges to their mental well-being. So rather than just sharing contact information where people can get help, we try to send messages to acknowledge the difficulty, especially during challenging moments throughout the year, while encouraging people to seek help by providing contact information in threaded tweets or in subsequent tweets. And like most people, we've been encouraging folks living in the United States to wear masks. But there are always those who disagree. There's always a troll, there's always a Grinch. Naturally, there are risks in these situations, as Alex pointed out, but there are also opportunities on occasion. And if we adapt the storyline, the Grinch ends up wearing a mask in Whoville anyway. So in conclusion, I was told to not have a conclusion slide. Sorry about that. Oh, and sorry about this one. That wasn't supposed to be there. A bad habit of promoting Canadian inventions, I guess, in the United States. In conclusion, when you boil it all down, military diplomacy, military Twitter diplomacy, is like the managing of any relationship. It's about listening, understanding, considering, and saying the right words at the right time. It's really about tweeting the right tweets at the right time. So that's the end of my comments for now, and I'll pass it back to Vanessa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Captain Sullivan. It's really great to have you here because your account is such a unique voice out there in the social media space, and it's great to see it unpacked a little bit and understand how it works the way it does, because it really does work. And I think part of that, a big driver behind that, is the humanity that you've infused into that account, which really helps to kind of nurture that relationship, which is hugely important with our neighbors to the south. So thank you so much for that presentation. So we are going to dive into our Q&A period now with our participants. And just a reminder to everybody out there, you can submit your questions to our panelists by using the icon on the platform that looks like a little person with their raised hand. So we're going to dive right in just with a couple of questions around innovation and around failure. So I'd like to get maybe an example from each of you, or based on your experience of something new that you tried, an innovation that you tried in your social media space that you weren't maybe sure was going to work, or you weren't sure how it was going to play out. What was it? What happened? And what did you learn from it? So maybe we'll start back with you, Véronique, since you've been so quiet for so long during the presentations.
Hi, sorry, it was unmuting. So something that we've tried, well, I think I've shown a few things that we tried to jump on the bandwagon. And in terms of the fun Reese Witherspoon challenge example I gave him to my presentation, it's funny because I got a director asking me, well, what is this? Like, why are you putting this? What's the objective? And, I had to explain that it's actually keeping us relevant. It's making us, follow a trend and show that we are in tune with what's happening and what's going on in the accounts. But then if you look at the comments, you actually had someone tag their friend and be like, look, Francine, from what Parks Canada is posting, my horoscope, I am an owl. So that person didn't get it whatsoever. I was like, oh no, that's not how it works. That's not the whole point. And then Francine responds and she's like, well, I'm born in November and they didn't even put that up. But that conversation, actually people were answering, and it actually started really a fun, cheeky conversation. So sometimes it hit or miss. Sometimes your audience will not get the latest trend. If you're jumping on it right away, people don't even know. But it starts conversations, and it actually sometimes works really well, and sometimes you bomb, but at least you tried. So, yeah.
Thanks, Véro. How about you, Alex?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes back to collaboration, right? So one example that comes to mind, where I'll give most of the credit actually to the Public Health Agency's marketing division, is they implemented and sort of consulted with us on implementing automatic reply tweets, so reminder tweets for paid advertising. So what that looked like, it was around a youth campaign to sort of encourage people in their 20s, college students, that sort of stuff, not to go out and party on the weekends in the context of the pandemic, right? So they'd receive automatic replies from our account every Friday, I think it was, to sort of remind them, hey, stay home this weekend, don't go out and party. Really cool, innovative tactic that I don't think has been super broadly used yet in the GOC context, and also had some unintended sort of effects too, where I got an email shortly after from our analytics team who sort of do all the tracking, and they said, whoa, how many tweets have you guys published in the past week? Because they'd had an enormous spike in at replies from our account because of the marketing tech, and that's something we hadn't really considered when we were working with marketing on that. And I think on the organic front, the biggest thing, and I think the thing that could have the most positive impact, is really, really ramping up our proactive engagement with Canadians individually. In the communities. I think it's so important because it's an example, it sets an example of positive engagement and promotes positive discussions, and sort of gives people incentive by way of saying like, oh, cool, as Véro sort of showed in one of her slides, people get excited sometimes when they have a government department reply to their tweets or engage with them, right? So they're a lot more likely to go out and push out positive discourse as a result.
Thanks so much, Alex. Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about social media is the feedback loop. You can have an assumption, make an assumption and say, well, let's try this and see what happens. And boom, right away, what's going to happen and how the public is going to react. And that helps inform, the cycle. It's fascinating and it's fun. Okay, over to you, Captain Sullivan. An example of innovative tactics that you've used in your approaches.
I think maybe some of them were in the presentation, but I'll highlight one that isn't. It's pinned to the top of our Twitter account right now for folks who want to maybe look it up. It's similar to some of Parks Canada, Véronique's initiatives. Here in the United States, we are not only representing the Canadian Armed Forces, but also Canada. And part of our role is to get out and about and see the countryside and and see the sites throughout the United States. But obviously that's been hampered by COVID-19. So one of the things we tried recently was to just acknowledge the fact that we're not able to get out and see America and see all the sites, but encourage people to show us by replying to a tweet. So we ultimately asked Americans to show us America. And I look down at it now, as of now, we're still getting them as of this morning, responses. And I tweeted it in October. So we're at over 17,000 or 1,700, replies. It's kind of veering into something that it might seem odd coming from a military account. But again, we're not only representing the Canadian Armed Forces, but also Canada, and not just to the American Department of Defense, but also all Americans. So it was a kind of a different way of engaging directly with the broader American public, and also allowing them to have control over what's featured on our account in a way. So it kind of leans towards that authenticity aspect that Veronique highlighted from the Parks Canada accounts. So yeah, I think that's my example for innovation from a military. Yeah.
That's a great example. It's fun to see how sometimes the threads we start take on a life of their own, and then they can be there still active months later after the initial tweet went out. So that's a really great example. So we're going to go to the other side now and talk about what our friend Alex was saying earlier about being risk aware. And despite our best efforts to be risk aware, mistakes are going to happen, some smaller, some bigger. So I'd like to hear from the panelists, and our participants would like to hear as well about an example of, something that didn't go quite as planned. A mistake was made or something went a little bit sideways. What was it? What happened? And again, what was the impact? What did you guys learn? How did you course correct? How did you adjust? So we'll start back with you again, Vero.
Yes, of course. First, I want to say Alex said in his presentation, it's just a tweet, and that's like the worst thing that someone can say. I hate when someone says that. Sorry. When a manager says, "Oh, it's just a tweet," I'm like, "No, it's not just a tweet." So one thing that we have learned, I've made a mistake and have learned is when we do plan our content, we will often, have a plan and then schedule it. And, once it's scheduled, you kind of forget about it, right? So a couple of years ago, it was there were like wildfires out west, and it was really it affected a lot of Canadians. People were losing their homes. There was a few fatalities. It was pretty sad and really hot topic. Oh, no pun intended. Really hot topic. What we had a post scheduled in our Hootsuite that went out with a photo of a bunch of people around this huge campfire. So it went out, and it was really, it really looked distasteful, right? It really looked like we weren't paying attention, and we kind of like, yay, fire. So we got called out. Like, people were like, how insensitive is that of you? And we have a fire ban out west. You can't even do a campfire in national parks right now. Like, that's so insensitive. So people really, let us know how they felt. So I think what we've learned is to do our due diligence. Is that every morning we call it a disaster check, but we actually check and make sure what we have scheduled is still current. So we make sure we read our clippings in the morning to make sure to see what's in the news. Sometimes, especially now, there's so many political issues, there's so many sensitive topics that's going on, and people are extra sensitive, especially during a pandemic. So we're really careful as to double check what we have scheduled, make sure that, okay, today, what's in the news, we're good. And yeah, just double check. So now that that we've done that mistake, again, it's just a tweet, Alex. We didn't get in trouble, but we got a lot of backlash from it.
Thanks, Vero. Yeah, I kind of had that same reaction when he said it's just a tweet. I was like, oh God, but yes, the tweet that launched 1,000 ships, it can happen. So how about you, Alex? Do you have an example of a mistake or a misstep that you can share with the group?
Oh, I sure do. And just to clarify, it's just a tweet when things go wrong. When things go well, it's the most important thing in the world. Yeah, in our case, I mean, a lot of the time it's minor things, right? Like an accidental retweet in Hootsuite, something like that. And there's lessons to be learned there too, to change your settings so that you get a prompt before you retweet something, that sort of thing. And then sometimes you miss things, right? Especially when you're rushing to get things out. An example that comes to mind for us was a couple of months ago, there was some misinformation being spread around by trolls on Twitter specifically about Canada having internment camps for people who are quarantining from COVID-19. So we rushed to get out a long thread to correct the misinformation and say, like, there's no way that's going to happen. But we made the mistake of putting the one of three or whatever it was in the thread at the beginning of the tweet. So it said one of three, and it started off with the word internment camps. So it could have been misread to say that, you know, 1 out of 3 quarantine sites are internment camps in Canada. It's one way to read it, and it was something that was missed. But the encouraging thing was that the community actually very much came to our defense. We, of course, had a couple people trolling, jumping in to say, like, the wording was actually very clear in the end, but it was just a way it could be misread. But we had people from our followers jumping in to say, oh, come on, it's clear what they're trying to say here, and da-da-da-da-da. So, I mean, ultimately, the consequence of that was that we got trolled by a couple of people. But the benefit of that was we saw that our followers were actually ready to engage on our behalf, on our content too. So, good and bad.
Thanks so much, Alex. And over to you, Captain Sullivan, for your example.
Yeah, I think one of ours that kind of, there was a hiccup, I will say. One of the big things that we try to do here is educate our followers about the ramifications of disinformation and ensure that folks are aware of influence activities online by foreign actors. It's certainly something that our federal government in Canada is focused on, but so too folks at Homeland Security here and the like. So we try to echo their sentiments. There was one tweet that we put out and said something to the effect of, beware the tweets that aim to divide us, and then showed a screenshot of a Twitter infographic showing maybe deceptive or disinformation tweets. So a fairly prominent journalist quote tweeted our tweet to say that we were making a jab at the current administration here, which is obviously something that we would never do, and it's never within our purview to do something like that. So immediately I felt the need to clarify and provided a link to government sources, both in Canada and the United States, to say, no, this is what we're talking about. Here's the threat and the awareness information right from the government website, from which I based the tweet. And I replied to him within 8 minutes, I think, certainly within 10. And he replied to say thank you for the clarity and that he misunderstood, and it was done. The lesson learned for me is obviously to be all the more cognizant of anything that could be misconstrued or perceived to be speaking at that political level. But also the lesson learned is to pay attention to your tweets as soon as they go out. So one of the key things for me, and I'm assuming for everyone who's monitoring any social media account, is battery life. And occasionally it's happened to me when I pop out a tweet and I run out of battery, so I'm scrambling to get to an outlet or a battery to recharge and find out if anybody's taking anything out of context or if maybe we should have worded something a little bit differently. So it was certainly a very good reminder of that. And obviously the importance of doing your homework beforehand and knowing the environment in which you're engaging and being able to show your work after the fact. So being armed with that prior research allowed me to respond quickly to diffuse a potentially like strategically harmful situation. So yeah, that's my example.
That's fantastic. That example took me on like an emotional roller coaster. I think I had a mini heart attack just listening to your story. And that's the speed and the constant vigilance is really key in that kind of environment for social media. You have to be really on top of things at all times. So a question from our participants here, and Véronique, you touched on it already in your presentation and your remarks, but it's about what the best way is to follow trends. The participant is asking, what's the best way to follow trends? Do you look at the trending hashtags? What other advice do you have for participants to stay current and stay relevant? So Véro, you've covered this. I'm just going to go to Alex and Kirk to see if they have anything to add in terms of tips for our participants on this point. So Alex, over to you.
Yeah, I think broadly having really robust monitoring to be aware of what's trending, right? So checking in every morning, like Vero said, being aware of what the conversations are happening. And also there's stuff that you can plan really well for, right? So the example I provided in my presentation of May the 4th, we know that's coming every year, right? And there was a great example from back in my time at Transport too. Which I actually didn't draft at all, so I don't take credit. I think it was my colleagues at the time, Troy and Jeff, who had taken care of it. But once in a lifetime opportunity for Back to the Future Day, the date that is on the DeLorean when they travel back in time. So they developed a tweet kind of as a joke that connected to the recall database for motor vehicles, right? So we did a fake recall of DeLoreans. And it got big traction, kind of went viral. And initially, there were some people who were quite concerned about it at the director level. But we ended up getting great sort of feedback. I think it was featured on The National that evening, too. So there was news coverage about it. So again, it's great to take risks that way. But yeah, it's really having your ear to the ground and taking the time to be creative, too, and think about how you can sort of contribute something interesting to the conversation.
Thanks, Alex. Kirk, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
One of the things that I use personally is just notifications. So pretty much all of the monitoring happens on my iPhone. And I have a broad array of accounts and people that I set the push notifications to from whenever they tweet anything. It certainly makes my phone light up quite a bit during the day, but it also helps me keep my finger on the pulse of what's important to the people who we're focused on here in the United States. So a lot of U.S. military accounts, journalists, and by U.S. military accounts, I don't necessarily mean the official accounts, I mean the people themselves. Again, we're focused on relationships. So yeah, the push notifications really help me be aware of what it is that, not necessarily the overarching trends, but the trends that matter to that audience and therefore matter to us. So I think that's my primary means, and then the other means is just being on Twitter as much as possible, 24/7, which is difficult, but yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, Twitter never sleeps, but hopefully you do at least some nights. So as you guys all know, the government has a really important agenda around accessibility and inclusion. And one of our participants has a question on this theme. They want to know, how does accessibility play into your tweets, and how do you choose to manage your interactions in a way that that considers accessibility? So let's go back to you, Véro, for that question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. In terms of obviously we're huge with visuals. We have a new media team that's in charge of videos, so we always make sure that we have the closed caption. Same for English and French. Our accounts, if we share an article in English, we'll try to do the same thing on the French, even if it's a different article but actually has that same context. So I'm not sure what else to answer to that question, to be quite honest, but yes, I know not all social media are accessible. We are conscious of that. So we always try, if we have something, we are sharing information, we make sure to have something that is available on the web that is fully accessible, that we can actually point people to. So that's very important when we're putting out new information and engaging with Canadians.
Thanks, Vero. How about you, Alex? This is a really important question in terms of communications around the pandemic. So we want to make sure that we don't leave people out who might have accessibility issues. How does the health portfolio manage this?
Similarly, I mean, of course, there are some limitations depending on the platform you're on, right? But I think it's important to be using what we do have to the full extent that we can with our like natively posted stuff. So that means, you know, closed captioning, using SRT files for video. It means having alt text for all of our images. And it does mean when we're linking to things to making sure that it's correlating that the stuff that's represented in the text in our post is represented in an accessible way on the web. To where we're linking to, right? Yeah, so, and similarly with OL considerations too, making sure that if we have to link to something that's English only on one account, to be trying to find an equivalent in French for our French account as well. But yeah, I think it's really about understanding the limitations based on each platform and then using the tools you do have to the full extent that you can.
Thanks, Alex. Kirk, did you have anything to add on the accessibility question that hasn't been covered?
No, I don't think so. That kind of hits the mark. I would just be repeating. So.
Okay, great. Well, we'll move right along and get to more participant questions. So the next one, and you mentioned, Alex, in your last response, you know, looking at your French accounts as well. The next one is about engagement on French posts. So I think, you know, social media tends to be a very Anglophone type medium, and we always sort of struggle to engage the French side of the audience on our tweets and et cetera. So how do you get more engagement on the French posts? You have different tactics because they tend to receive much less engagement compared to English posts. So who would like to start on this one? Alex or Vero? I'm looking at you guys because the English-French on the corporate accounts. Okay, Vero, go for it. Vas-y.
I just want a huge shout out to Jael. So Jael is our translator here at Parks. She is amazing at when we have an English post, obviously we need to post the same thing on French, but she's amazing at making it more, I love puns. I love to make puns, or I love to make, you know, little jokes. If you translate a pun in French, gosh, it looks really, really bad. So you have to adapt to the Francophone, right? And even to the Francophone culture, if I'm thinking about as a Québécoise, obviously there are some things that we do and the way that we speak that is very different from, you know, just the regular translation in French. So we do make sure that we hit those marks and that we engage with people in a way that, you know, is not just a word-by-word translation. So again, we adapt our puns, we adapt our language, but also in our conversation, we make sure to have that casual and conversational tone that we have on the English account, but having it in French with that Québécois attitude.
Thanks, Vero. Yeah, it's true. There are two culturally different kind of spheres, right, that you have to play in. How about you, Alex? Any advice for engaging the Francophone audience?
Yeah, similarly, I think it's about considering the cultural context too, right? And the demographics are different on social media platforms based on sort of the levels of engagement, right? So Francophone Canadians might be more likely, for example, to engage on Facebook than they would on Twitter generally. Yeah, I mean, for example, actually with my presentation, there was that Office Space meme, which kind of ages me a little bit. But I had run it by my colleague Eric, who's a Francophone member of our team, and said, like, does this even make sense in French? Or do you know the movie Office Space? And he's like, no, I have no idea, man. Never heard of it. But it's still kind of funny in French, so it's okay. So I think it's about having that sort of built into your QA to sort of have someone with that lens looking at the content and saying, okay, you know what, maybe we can adjust it or use a different example here that's equivalent.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to skip ahead to a question that really touches all of us, and it's a really big question that was of huge concern, I think, to all government departments and particularly the center when social media first began to be a real tool for government departments to use. And that question is about alignment. How do you ensure that your messaging is consistent across the government? It's consistent with what the broader government messaging is out there. How do you deal with messaging that might be contradictory or conflicting from one department to another? It's tough to manage. So we'll start maybe with you, Kirk, on this question.
Yeah, it's a challenge, really. I mentioned about being aware of what's going on Twitter. You also have to be very aware of what's going on internally, obviously. So here in the United States, we have to be very aware of not only our policy, but also the policies of the United States Department of Defense. And making sure we kind of thread the needle of maintaining like consistency with what's being said in Canada and also what's being said in the United States while telling people about what matters to us in a way that they're more likely to receive it well. And by receive it well, I ultimately mean understand and engage with. So it's something that, like, I mean, that's what I spend my days thinking about, how to do that. But it really, certainly when there are ongoing matters, so we're talking about maybe a significant event overseas, it's certainly important to have your finger on the pulse internally as well, to not get out in front of some of the accounts that are leading the effort, either back in Ottawa or overseas. I think there are unique and creative ways that you can still insert yourself into the conversation while not countering anything being said. Perhaps that means being vague, but I think it also means focusing on people. So when you focus on people and the experience, like maybe the uncertainty or the fear or the pain that people are feeling, then really, I mean, that's always consistent across government in being concerned about people. So yeah, the focus on humans, again, empathy, compassion, that usually helps me remain consistent across the board.
Thanks. Yeah, that's great advice. Alex, how about you?
I think it's kind of important to note too that the organizational sort of structure to facilitate that interdepartmental whole of government voice has really evolved in positive ways over the past few years. So I know for us, it's really about being consistent in how we're collaborating across departments, right? So being part of working groups, communities of practice to reach out, sharing your social media plans, sharing key messages, sharing images, video files, all of that stuff, so that we can have consistency, both in terms of like the messaging, but also in terms of the branding and stuff. So we're using consistent imagery, consistent videos, and also it, I think, helps individual departments sort of lean out their own processes when they're getting sort of canned things from another department who's perhaps leading on a file, to be able to sort of be quick in responding and getting in the conversation as well.
Thanks, Alex. What about at Parks? How do you guys make sure you stay aligned with the broader government messaging?
Yeah, very similar to what Kirk and Alex touched on, but we have, like, social media in government is actually a small world. It's really a small community. And as I'm talking, I'm seeing my Slack channel actually popping right now. So we all keep in touch through, different tools. But we also, kind of like, oh, shoot, I need help. Can you retweet us? And like, scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So we actually lean on each other sometimes to actually pass messages on. And so having that collaboration, and, if you're telling me, well, I need something from library and archive, I know exactly who to call. So we're all really in touch with the community, and using tools like that, we kind of know who's doing what when, and kind of always helping out and collaborating. And also sometimes you'll have someone saying, well, I'm doing this campaign, it would be really great to have parks and transport and health, and then we kind of meet and just align ourselves. So again, just tapping into the community is always really helpful.
Thanks, Vero. So we're just about at time, so we'll take one more audience question. And because, the young people are our future, somebody wants to know how you engage with youth more specifically. Do you have any tips and tricks to engage youth on social media more specifically in terms of your audiences? So maybe back to you right away, Vero, on this, because parks is, our future generation of conservationists and campers and parks lovers.
Yeah. TikTok. No, I'm just kidding. I think the big thing is to be authentic. What we've noticed, user-generated content is a big thing. We've noticed when we use these great, photos that were staged and are really pretty, that doesn't really resonate with the younger generation. That they want content that's now, that's authentic. Give me a selfie, show me a picture, even if it's not cropped and it's like so again, I think it's being authentic, showing that authentic voice, but also being on trend and using that humor, that puns. Sometimes that relates a bit more to the younger generation.
Thanks, Vero. What about you, Alex?
Yeah, I think part of it too is challenging your assumptions about how young people are engaging on social media, right? I remember we did a POR study at Health a few years back that social media was involved in about how young people are engaging in social media, their awareness, this kind of health and how they want to engage. And it really, a lot of us were taken aback by just how sophisticated, not just in terms of the technology, but in terms of the conversations that are happening on social, right? And how aware of how algorithms work and how they're potentially being, engaged with in that lens by other platforms. And young kids too, like kids who are like 10 and 12, were super hyper aware of how these platforms work. So I think it's important to kind of acknowledge that sort of sophisticated level of awareness with them, and also kind of speak to them, really focus on plain language and talk to them in their language too, right? So they're not going to respond to stuff that's very sort of with a more bureaucratic lens or more about announcements and stuff. You need to focus on meeting them in conversations where they already are.
Thanks, Alex. Last word goes to you, Kirk, on this question around engaging youth audiences.
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that wasn't necessarily aimed at a youth audience, but it's gone over really well since last year. So we did it and lead up to Christmas last year and the holiday season. And also this year has been the card for Christmas cards for folks who are overseas and away from their families. An outpouring of support, that hundreds of thousands of cards really, and primarily from schools. So students, teachers, I guess, had their students write Christmas cards and letters to our folks who are away from home for the holidays. And so that was something that was unintended, and certainly not aiming to engage with that audience necessarily, but it was quite interesting to see. The other, for us, like I said, we're focused on engaging with primarily with our military counterparts here. Naturally, a lot of them are young. And while they might not predominantly be on Twitter, they might be on other platforms, we do see them engage with our account. And even if they don't engage with our account, I think one of the unique ways in which we can engage with them is by sharing their content. So we look to share the content of, say, cadets at one of the military academies here. And then we're kind of giving over our platform to them. So I think it affords us that unique opportunity to allow their voice to be part of our voice. Yeah, so I guess that's it from a military diplomatic perspective in engaging with youth.
Thank you. That's a great note to end on. So I just want to thank you all once again, Kirk, Alex, Véronique. Thanks so much for being on our panel today. This has been really informative. I've definitely learned a lot just from your presentations and our exchanges. Also like to really thank the Communications Community Office for your collaboration in this event that we have today, and thank all our participants across Canada for tuning in and joining us for learning on social media. So on behalf of the school, again, thanks so much. Your feedback is really important. So just for our participants, I just want to flag that you're going to get an evaluation questionnaire. Really encourage you to fill it out and let us know what you thought of the event so that we can continue to offer learning opportunities that are relevant and useful to everybody across the country. And visit our website, follow us on social media. We hope to see you back for another one of our virtual events soon. So once again, thank you so much and have a wonderful day, everybody.